In 1993, an idea exploded into the world of international politics, an idea so controversial, so provocative, that it challenged the very way we understand global conflict. It wasn't about capitalism versus communism. It wasn't about rich versus poor. It was about culture. Samuel P. Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations proposed a future shaped not by ideology, but by the deep fault lines between civilizations. Was he a visionary or a doomsayer? This is not just a theory. This is a global warning. To understand Huntington's warning, we must first go back to the world that emerged after the Cold War, a world that thought peace had finally arrived. The Cold War had ended. The Berlin Wall had fallen. And for a brief moment, the world thought it might be heading toward a peaceful, globalized future. Many thinkers, most notably Francis Fukuyama, declared that liberal democracy had won. That we were witnessing the end of history. But Huntington didn't buy it. In his 1993 article, later expanded into the 1996 book The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, he argued that the new world would not be united, it would be divided. Not by ideologies, but by civilizations, vast cultural zones defined by religion, language, history, and identity. And most importantly, he warned that future wars would be fought not between nations, but between civilizations. But Huntington wasn't interested in nations or politics. He looked deeper into civilizations and asked, what truly defines who we are? But what exactly is a civilization? Huntington defined it as the broadest level of cultural identity, beyond nations, beyond ethnicities. He identified 8 major civilizations. 1. Western Europe, North America, Australia. 2. Sinic, China and Chinese-influenced East Asia. 3. Islamic, Middle East, North Africa, parts of Asia. 4. Hindu, India and the Indian cultural sphere. 5. Orthodox, Russia and Eastern Europe. 6. Japanese, uniquely Japan. 7. Latin American, often grouped with the West, but distinct. 8. African, contested as a civilization, but growing in importance. Each of these civilizations has its own worldview, its own understanding of authority, human rights, religion, and purpose. And that's where the clash begins. So why will these civilizations clash? Huntington laid out 6 powerful reasons that point to an unavoidable global tension. According to Huntington, there are 6 reasons why civilizations are on a collision course. 1. Cultural differences are real and deeply rooted. Unlike political ideologies, cultures evolve over centuries and are not easily changed. 2. Globalization brings civilizations into more frequent contact, and more contact means more friction. 3. Economic modernization separates people from local identities, making religion and culture more attractive as sources of meaning. 4. The West is at its peak, and other civilizations are rising. Resentment toward Western dominance fuels conflict. 5. Cultural differences are less negotiable than political ones. 6. Economic and military power is shifting, and the West can no longer impose its values unchallenged. He called this process the West versus the rest. Huntington warned that the universalist push of Western liberalism, promoting democracy, human rights, and capitalism everywhere, would spark resistance, not acceptance. These clashes won't happen in the abstract, they'll erupt where civilizations touch. Along fault lines, where history, culture, and identity collide. Where would this clash happen? Huntington pointed to the fault lines, the geographical and cultural borders where civilizations meet. the border between Islam and Christianity in places like Bosnia, Nigeria, and Sudan. The divide between Orthodox and Western Europe, especially in Ukraine. The growing rivalry between China and the West, in East Asia and the South China Sea. These are not just lines on a map. They are pressure points. And when pressure builds, conflict erupts. Nowhere is this more apparent than between Islam and the West, a confrontation that, according to Huntington, runs deeper than politics. Huntington devoted a significant section of his book to the Islamic world, and this is where many of his harshest critics emerged. He claimed, Islam has bloody borders. He argued that many of the world's ongoing conflicts, from Chechnya to Kashmir to Palestine, involved Muslims clashing with non-Muslims. But his most controversial idea was this: the problem is not with Islamic fundamentalism, it is with Islam itself. He saw a historical pattern of conflict between the Islamic and Western civilizations, made worse by the collapse of secular Arab nationalism and the rise of Islamic identity politics. Was this Islamophobia? Or a cold, realist observation of history? But Islam is not the only rising force. In the East, a new challenger stirs, one with ancient roots and modern ambitions: China. Another major fault line. China and the West. Huntington argued that the Sinic civilization, led by China, would seek to challenge Western supremacy. Not just economically, but culturally and militarily. And here's where it gets interesting. He predicted that China and the Islamic world might align in opposition to the West. An axis of anti-Western civilizations, not based on ideology, but on common resistance to Western values. In the 21st century, this prediction no longer sounds far-fetched. And then there are the countries caught in between, torn between identities, civilizations, and futures. What happens to countries that are caught between civilizations? Huntington called them torn countries. Nations like Turkey, split between Islam and secular Westernism. Mexico, culturally distinct but geographically tied to the West. Russia, historically orthodox but politically fluctuating. These countries, he argued, face internal identity crises. Are they East or West? Modern or traditional? Islamic or secular? The results: instability, confusion, and at times, violent upheaval. The West, Huntington argued, was not only powerful, it was arrogant. And that arrogance may be its greatest vulnerability. Huntington was not blindly pro-Western. In fact, he had harsh words for the West's arrogance. He warned that Western countries wrongly believed that their values were universal, that the whole world should naturally evolve into liberal democracies. But this belief, he said, was a dangerous illusion. Because when the West tries to impose its values, it provokes resistance from other civilizations, especially Islam and Confucianism. The West must learn to coexist with other civilizations. It cannot remake the world in its own image. So what does the future hold? A unified world order, or a planet fragmented by civilizational divides? In the final chapters, Huntington offered a vision of the future. Not one of harmony, but of managed division. He argued that civilizations must respect each other's differences. That the West should abandon its missionary zeal and adopt a posture of restraint and humility. This is not a call for surrender. It is a call for realism. Because civilizations are not going away. They are, in fact, growing stronger. Of course, not everyone agreed with Huntington. Critics from across the world pushed back, and their voices still echo today. The book has been heavily criticized. Critics say it promotes stereotypes, fuels xenophobia, and turns culture into destiny. They argue that conflicts are driven by politics, economics, and power, not civilizations. Others, like Edward said, accused Huntington of reviving a neo-Orientalist worldview, portraying the West as rational and superior, and the rest as emotional and dangerous. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of Huntington's predictions have aged better than his critics expected. The rise of Islamic extremism. The expansion of Chinese assertiveness. The West's growing cultural insecurity. Whether you agree with him or not, Huntington forced the world to confront a reality it didn't want to face. Civilizations are not flags. They are not borders. Their stories ancient, proud, and often incompatible. Samuel P. Huntington warned us. In the post-Cold War world, the lines of conflict would not be red or blue. They would be civilizational. So now we must ask, are we moving toward understanding, or toward the very clash he warned us about? Because the greatest danger may not be the clash of civilizations, but the refusal to believe it could ever happen.